Welcome to VoteProPot-Cast, brought to you by VoteProPot.com.
So, guys, I decided I think I'm going to join the First Church of Cannabis.
Mm-hmm.
Really?
Okay.
The one out in Colorado?
Yeah, I'm not going to go to church or practice. I just want to become an ordained minister so I can marry people in cannabis wedding.
Cool.
What constitutes a cannabis wedding?
I take it that the minister is stoned. That's basically what I'm bringing to the table.
Welcome everybody to episode 30 already. We're just moving right along. And we've got, of course, some news to catch you guys up on. Florida lawmakers are looking to lift the ban on flour. Apparently, up to now, you can only buy concentrates in Florida. New York. A New York councilman wants to abolish testing for THC by employers. I guess as a condition of employment. I think that's a good thing. Mexican cartels, our favorite people, have come up with a rather novel way of dealing with the wall. On the other side of the wall, Trump allies are considering using hempcrete. That's right, hempcrete, to build border walls with private funds. So we're going to get to all of that. But before we get into all of that, I kind of want to explore this with you guys and just see what you think. With America kind of hopefully moving towards legalization, what I'm interested in is that, there's a lot of people wondering if now is a good time to invest in cannabis companies, whether Canada is going to kind of press its advantage with the head start it got on legalization. What do you guys think we can expect for the burgeoning cannabis industry post-prohibition? I mean, I think there's probably a lot we can learn from the alcohol prohibition that'll kind of, I don't know, or maybe not.
Mark Twain once said, history doesn't repeat itself, but it does rhyme. People are now seeing a lot of similarities between alcohol prohibition and cannabis prohibition. After the First World War, there was a temperance movement that really was anti-alcohol. They wanted to make alcohol legal, but the federal government said, well, we can't because we sort of depend on the tax revenues from the sale of alcohol. So the temperance movement backed the new idea of having an income tax. So once an income tax was imposed, that's when the temperance movement was able to...
Isn't that interesting? It's all kind of connected.
Yeah, that's how they got the Volstead Act passed in the 18th Amendment. Now, that happened in 1920.
IRS just ruined everything.
Now, the reasons that the temperance movement were saying that they wanted to make alcohol illegal, and the reasons they claimed were, one, it would reduce crime and corruption. Two.
Oh, yeah.
Got that one right.
Definitely did that.
It would solve social problems, like as alcoholism, had more, many social issues, obviously.
Wow, hit the nail on the head.
It would reduce tax burden from prisons and poorhouses, and it would improve health if we made it illegal. So obviously they whiffed it on all those, man. They
all of them.
When they first enabled prohibition or enacted prohibition, it worked. The drinking went down, but very quickly people learned to get around the law. Something happened called what psychologists called reactance. And what reactance is when you tell someone they can't do something, they immediately want to do it. So instead,
that's the first thing
don't smoke that. Oh yeah, watch me. So that, along with the obviously the attractiveness and the addictiveness nature of alcohol started consumption picked up, and it got to pre-prohibition levels. Now, along with that, what happened was crime and corruption just increased. That's when the gangsters, really got their foothold, and organized crime became big business. Corruption also spread into...
Well, so far, this is really paralleling what's happened with cannabis.
Absolutely.
Prohibition.
Right.
I mean, right down the line.
Now, corruption also spread into politics and medicine. 6 months after the 18th Amendment was enacted, doctors were given the right to write medical whiskey prescriptions. Now, the medical whiskey industry was a $40 million industry. In comparison, Al Capone did $60 million in sales in 1927. Now, local police and prohibition agents also, they succumbed to the temptation of bootlegging, and they became corrupt. So, and then what happened was the rich people had these great speakeasies, these posh clubs, and they could drink untouched. But the average citizen was made out to be a hardened criminal for drinking. Mm-hmm. And especially the poor and minorities were often
also sounds familiar.
Singled out. Now, what happened, so many thousands and thousands of people were arrested that there was a backlog in the courts. Now, what they did to alleviate the backlogs, they started doing something they call the plea bargain, which we still use to this day. Now, police raids were becoming even more violent, and there was a public outcry to
So we didn't have plea bargains before that?
Well, if they might have had them, but they weren't widely used.
I see. I did not know that.
I didn't either.
Yeah. So the prohibition on alcohol just got worse and worse. And by the end of the 1920s and the beginning of the 1930s, it was obvious that it wasn't going to succeed. And then also something else that happened was the Great Depression. And they basically enacted the 21st Amendment for financial reasons. I mean, we needed the money, right? So as far as cannabis is concerned, now we could talk for hours on how they made cannabis illegal, but we'll just touch on it. In 1937, they passed the Marijuana Tax Act, which was backed by Harry Anslinger. Anslinger. I wrote that down wrong. It's a typo.
Well, it's spelled ass-liquor, but it's pronounced Anslinger.
He was voted person most wanted to be bong waterboarded.
Bong water.
That'd be nasty, wouldn't it? Oh, jeez.
Yeah.
Okay.
Talk about insults.
Especially college bong water, that you never change. Sat there for months.
Yeah.
Okay. Now, in 1970, Nixon passed the Controlled Substance Act. Now, at the same time, they commissioned the Schaefer Report. I think Schaefer was the governor of Pennsylvania, I believe, which Schaefer came back with in 1972. Now, when they enacted the Controlled Substance Act, they said, we're going to put marijuana on Schedule 1 until the Schaefer Report comes on, then we'll know better where to put it. Now, when the Schaefer Report came out, it said it called for decriminalization, that there's nothing wrong with it, it's not addictive, it's not hurting kids, and Nixon just...
It doesn't belong on Schedule 1.
Right. Nixon just dropped it in the trash can and said, nope, marijuana...
We're leaving it there.
We're going to use that to vilify the liberals. Yeah, so...
Right.
So we know how that happened. Now,
we all know how John Ehrlichman explained all of this.
Right, that's a perfect example. Yeah. Now, Now, obviously, the prohibition on alcohol and cannabis have failed. The first law was back in 1875, I believe it was, something like that, where in San Francisco they made opium illegal. So the United States government has, for 140 years, has been battling opium and opioids for 140 years, and after 140 years, we're in the midst of an epidemic. So how is that policy working? Please.
Badly.
Not well.
Not.
Okay, there's a few things we've learned from prohibition of alcohol and cannabis. One of them, the first thing is that it increases crime with bootleggers and drug cartels and a lot of small crime too. I think you'll see that a lot of cannabis in the last 20 years was grown in the United States and either sold by the grower right to the end user or like one person in between. It was a very short distribution chain. And so there was these small little micro industries all over the place. And it wasn't a big, and yes, there were big drug cartels involved, but with American cannabis becoming more and more prevalent, Mexican drug cartels took a big hit.
One of the things that people don't notice, they think about how much crime there was during Prohibition, and there was, obviously. The mob, Luciano and Al Capone and all that. But compared to the drug wars, it doesn't even compare. And if you look
really
at
doesn't.
No, the St. Valentine's Day Massacre was in 29, I think, and they killed like 7 people, 7 guys who were, trafficking. It was national news.
But alcohol prohibition was uniquely just American. The drug war is international.
That's a good point. That's true.
That's true.
Still, I mean, we're talking about 7 people were killed in 29, and it was
absolutely.
national headlines. It was a big deal. How many people are killed in Detroit every day?
Right.
But the crime organizations that formed as a result of Prohibition,
right?
The crime families, especially the Italian, so-called mafia, they were the same ones involved with the drug trade at a certain point. I mean, it wasn't always,
that's true. Yeah.
El Chapo.
No, you're right.
It was.
the old Al Capone.
Carmine Galante in the 70s, bringing heroin in car gas tanks, and he made these amazingly intricate distribution chains. So it's really the same. We're still dealing with that same legacy from the Volstead Act.
Right. And quite frankly, I don't know for sure, but quite possibly some of the same organized crime organizations are still in business to this day. It started in the 1920s.
Absolutely.
I'm sure you're right, Andrew.
Now, the next thing is racial inequality. Now, we know what John Ehrlichman said about cannabis, and that people in the United States of color are 4 to 8 times more, have a 4 or 8 to 8 times greater chance of being arrested. Now, during alcohol prohibition in the southern states, the Ku Klux Klan was used to enforce prohibition laws. And they would obviously target people of color.
You think?
And they would go in, they would knock the doors down, they would confiscate evidence, they would arrest people, they killed some people, they burned houses down. And it was popular in the South. And during the 1920s, during Prohibition, when the Klan was doing this, is when the Ku Klux Klan reached its peak of popularity. Now, along with the police and this, there was kickback, and all these people would start going, "Whoa, whoa, whoa! What's going on here? That's not right." I mean, not everyone in the South were agreed with it.
The police were using the Ku Klux Klan, or were the Ku Klux Klan just doing it on
Some of the
their own?
police were in the Klan.
Oh, yeah, well, that may be too.
Well, they supplemented the law enforcement.
Let's just call
with
it
the Klan.
what it was.
Yeah.
No shit. Wow.
Now, the next thing is harm reduction. People use the drug that is most readily available. So when you put a prohibition on something, they're going to turn to something else. Now,
good point.
There were, all kinds of illegal
Opioids.
alcohols, and bathtub gins that were killing people, making people blind. It was awful stuff. And to this day now, with fentanyl out, these illegal drugs, people are dying left and right. Now, for a modern look, in Kentucky, to this day, there's still dry counties from Prohibition, alcohol dry. Now,
In Virginia, too.
Right, in Virginia. And now they did a look at that, and they found that these dry counties in Kentucky have a terrifying large amount of meth labs. So if they can't,
right?
And they say in those counties, alcohol consumption is down. People don't drink as much in those dry counties. But when it comes to other drugs, boom, they do more of them than the neighboring counties.
Interesting.
So I wonder, does that mean that with cannabis legalization, some of that other nasty drug use will go down? It's
entirely
funny
possible. You should say that, because now they've found that with in states that medical marijuana is legal, opioid use and overdoses are down. Another interesting study said states with medical marijuana, doctors are writing on an average of 1,800 less opioid prescriptions a year.
Wow.
That's pretty
Wow.
heavy.
So it's not a supposition, it's a fact.
No, that's significant.
That's amazing.
And the last thing we learned from both of these are the economic impact. We'll never know when they put a prohibition on cannabis how much money was lost, because there really was an industry beforehand, and marijuana really didn't become popular until after it was criminalized. But we do have an idea of what happened with alcohol, and obviously there was billions of dollars, tax dollars, that were lost from the prohibition.
Sure.
Now,
and like you said, that's the reason they
right. The whole reason they brought back alcohol was for economic reasons. Period.
Yeah,
that's
during
right.
the Depression.
And FDR,
21st Amendment.
When FDR signed the legislation to put an end to prohibition, the first thing he said was, "I think it would be a good time for a beer."
Well,
it's always a good time for a beer.
In 2018, legal cannabis worldwide sales were $16.9 billion. Now, in the United States, sales in the United States were $12.2 billion, which means the United States purchased 72% of all the legal cannabis sold worldwide.
Holy shit.
And how many states are recreational? I mean, that's not even the whole.
USA.
Wow. 78% of the
We're the
world.
champions.
Yeah, baked in America, man.
Wow.
I was baked in the USA.
There was Ronald Reagan used to say that if you want less of something, tax it. If you want more of something, subsidize it. I would add to that, if you really want more of something, criminalize it.
There you go.
We hope you are enjoying Vote Pro Podcast. We're 30 episodes into this, and we're having just a blast with it. We really want to hear what you think. Your comments, your corrections, if any, your questions. Contact us at VoteProPot.com.
Or send us an email at VoteProPot@gmail.com. And we've got a message line. You can call in, leave a message, an idea, a suggestion, a criticism, and we'll put you on the show. It's 240-257-2441. You can find it in our show description as well.
And please like and follow us on Facebook, LinkedIn, and Twitter. Just do a search for Vote Pro Pot. At the end of alcohol prohibition, alcohol was legal in Canada. And for example, right now, cannabis is legal in Canada. Cannabis is legal in Canada. So, and we're seeing all the big investments, and some of the biggest companies are now based in Canada because they can. Now,
well, I was wondering about that.
Now, with what they did find that when they the states that allowed alcohol sales back in 1933, the first states that legalized alcohol were the states that had the greatest short and long-term benefit from it. So the states that dragged their feet were the states that didn't really make as much money.
Well, I mean, you saw that a lot of the alcohol coming to America was coming from Canada.
Right. All the whiskeys. So, so when Prohibition ended, there were trainloads of Seagram's whiskey just waiting to come in. So, and same with to the south of the United States, there was a bunch of Caribbean rum. All those Caribbean rum company distilleries were up and running legally all throughout Prohibition. So when it ended, they just beefed up. A lot of investors probably invested in those companies. Now, investing in alcohol companies spiked 2 months. It came to its peak at 2 months before the end of Prohibition, alcohol prohibition. Mm-hmm. So maybe we might learn something from that. So
what you want to do is figure out when we're 2 months away from cannabis legalization and invest.
Yeah. Well, if you want to be like everyone else, if you want to be sooner, you would have already invested.
Yeah, I follow some of the pot stocks, and I'm telling you, if you got in 2 years ago, you made a shit ton of money in the last year and a half. Some of them fell off this year a little, but still. I mean, there's some of these big stocks have gone from...
You just never know with stocks.
Well, breweries boomed right after, because I guess you could build a brewery, I guess, pretty quickly. And from 1933 to 1977, all the breweries more or less consolidated.
Well, I mean, they had a lot of ground to catch up on. I mean, the Prohibition, what was it, 9 years, right?
No, it's 13 years.
13.
13 years, okay, yeah. 1920 to
1933.
Yeah, to the end of 33. The law didn't discriminate between hard liquor, beer, or wine. They were all... Now, there were exceptions to the law, and this is something I didn't know. People were... The Volstead Act actually allowed individuals or people to make up to 200 gallons of wine each year for their own consumption.
How could you track that?
And you could use it for health reasons and,
I didn't know that.
And whatnot. And like you say, if you got a doctor to write you a prescription for whiskey, you could buy whiskey.
Yeah. Now, were Catholic churches serving wine during communion during Prohibition?
No, they stopped doing that. I mean, I grew up in the Catholic church and we never had wine.
Really? I grew up in the Greek Orthodox church. Yeah, we had fortified wine. We were drinking port.
Oh, really?
with a ladle.
No, we used a straw.
And they just handed you a loaf of bread and you took a big bite out of it.
Okay.
No.
Well, but the problem was that after by the time, the First Amendment was, or the 21st Amendment was adopted in, what was it, December of 33, right?
33, yeah.
Correct.
The damage to the industries had pretty much been done. Not only the knowledge about distilling and brewing and winemaking was lost, but the infrastructure, the equipment, the facilities were destroyed.
The grape stocks too, also the vines.
Grape stock. Now a lot of the agriculture. Here's one of the differences: is that with cannabis, the actual agriculture is prohibited. You can't grow the stuff. With alcohol, you could grow barley or you could grow grapes. You use them for other things. Mm-hmm. So that part of it was more or less intact and
yeah, but it's scaled down.
But very much scaled down. But in the rest of the industry, I mean, these manufacturers, distillers and brewers, they basically had to rebuild the entire industry from the ground up. So now the interesting thing, here's another thing I didn't know, that the brewing industry got a little bit of a head start because beer, at least 3.2% beer, was legalized in March of 1933, 9 months before the repeal by the Cullen-Harrison Act. And within a year, or by the time the First Amendment was adopted in December that year, 31 brewers were already back in operation, and a year later, more than 750 brewers were back in business. Some of the ones that they survived Prohibition, but they didn't make it to this day. But some did, like Pittsburgh Brewing, makers of what's it called, Iron City beer, a deliciously metallic beer. Not a beer for drinking, but a beer for kind of sitting back and avoiding.
Now you got people in Pittsburgh pissed off, dude.
No, I'm kidding. But they survived by producing soda and soft drinks.
Oh, okay. Retooled.
The Yingling, one of my favorite beers, the oldest continuously operating brewery in America, if I'm not mistaken, that survived, believe it or not, by making ice cream. And to a certain extent by making the non-alcoholic, what they called near beer. The thing was that the Volstead Act only forbade or banned manufacture, sale, and transportation of intoxicating liquors, not their consumption. So, and this is another thing that it took me by surprise. If you could make the wine, which you were allowed to do, or if you had stockpiles of liquor, going into Prohibition, you're allowed to drink it.
I didn't know that.
You can't do that with cannabis.
No.
The actual use of cannabis is part of what's prohibited. So that's another thing that's different.
Did I mention that during Prohibition of alcohol, cannabis use increased?
Huh. Well, that makes sense, actually, if you think about it.
Well, that's kind of like the same effect as the meth labs springing up in dry
That's exactly
counties in Kentucky.
Reduction.
Yeah.
You've got people are going to make choices. People are going to use alternatives, And these are the things that happen. And just to finish this thought, these are once again the things that have happened. This is what I rail on all the time. When government steps in and undermines freedom of choice and free enterprise. This is the damage that is done. There's a lot to be learned and a lot of parallels between Prohibition and what we might expect when cannabis is finally legalized. But then again, you just never know, do you?
We've talked before about Florida and their medical marijuana program law, and the fact that you can't buy flower, you can't smoke. Florida lawmaker advances legislation to lift the ban on smokable marijuana. This is from High Times. There are two separate proposals, and both have the same outcome, which is that smokable cannabis for medical marijuana patients would be legal. The difference is one of the plans allows you just to buy flower and do whatever you want with it, obviously. And the other one, you have to buy pre-rolls. But it looks pretty good for these. In both cases, one of that they're going to pass. One of the two will pass. It's possible both will pass, and then they'll have to negotiate it out in the Senate and in the state Senate and get it signed. It says here the House plan to remove the ban originally included a requirement that doctors obtain the approval of a case review panel before issuing I know, total bullshit, huh? But before issuing a recommendation for smokable marijuana. A lot of this stuff was kicked back by the way, by Governor Rick Scott. The ban on smokable cannabis was enacted by legislators after voters approved a constitutional amendment legalizing medical marijuana. That was 2016. The ban was challenged with a lawsuit from cannabis activists and ruled unconstitutional. And so after that happened, Governor, at the time, Rick Scott, filed an appeal. And that's what's been holding it up. So that's good news, I reckon, that Florida's going to – I mean, that's so stupid that you can buy
Have either of you guys used pre-rolled joints?
No. Yeah. No. Yes, I have.
Are they any – I mean, what do you get with those? I mean –
well, they're
it's a pre-rolled
expertly
joint.
rolled. They're in cones, so they burn pretty well. Mm-hmm. But the thing about it is, if you do the price comparison, sometimes, you can just – buy flour and roll your own joints. It's sort of ridiculous,
right?
But to say you can only buy pre-rolled joints. That's really going to keep people from breaking them open and doing bongers. Really?
Yeah. But like you said, Andrew, it's not that cost effective. Buying a pre-roll. I mean, and
some actually here in Maryland, I was at the dispensary and they have these things called caviar joints, and they have like a glass tip, and they're like high grade flour with keef and oil and shatter wrapped around it.
That sounds dangerous.
They're like $35 or $40 a joint.
Well, my problem with joints nowadays is it's, I like, rolling a little pinner's cool, a little pin joint. But those, big fat cigarette-sized joints, man, so much weed just goes up in the air and it's just so expensive.
Well, you got to put them out and start them again, right?
Yeah.
I mean, it seems
like
to
a cigar,
me.
You're right. But then
also pass them around at a very big party.
I think a lot of people, like for myself, for example, I'm into microdosing. So I'm never going to smoke a joint in one sitting. I mean,
exactly.
I'll let it go out and relight it up 50 times, because I just 1 or 2 puffs, I'm good. I could sit next to someone smoking one of those, and that'd be good enough for me. I wouldn't have to smoke it.
Yeah.
You old guys in your joints, man.
I got the second story here on the state is New York. New York Councilman Jumaine Williams embraces common sense drug testing policy. We've talked about this on the show, fellas, about, people being tested prior to employment and not getting a job because they tested positive for THC. Well, Councilman Jumaine Williams' bill aims to end workplace drug testing. This is in New York City for THC as a condition for employment. So that's good news. That's what we're looking for all over the place, because it's crazy if it's legal now. Of course, everybody knows you can test positive weeks after you smoked, and it seems crazy to be tested for something that's legal. The exemptions.
Well, I'm sure I would test positive for just using topicals.
Exactly.
That's all I use.
Yeah. Or the exception in this gentleman's case, this councilman's case, would be people working in law enforcement or driving heavy equipment or public transit, that kind of thing. But he's modeled it after Canada. Canada has adopted a bill that no longer will people be tested for cannabis unless they're in the public transit sector as a Canadian worker. So.
Well, I would want them to be tested for alcohol too. I wouldn't want someone who's abusing alcohol to drive a bus.
Oh yeah, absolutely, and they do,
or any other psychoactive drug,
and they do test bus drivers, and they test them arbitrarily. They'll call you at 5 a.m. before your shift and say you got an hour to get here and pee in a cup.
Yeah, I can understand. But do you need to take a drug test to be a fry cook at Chick-fil-A?
Yeah,
I mean,
well, I think
I don't think so.
I mean, not to denigrate fry cooks, but I think this more gets into folks like in the construction business. I mean, if you're hiring a mechanic or a laborer or whatever. a lot of these have mandatory drug testing, and it's like, it's not fair because, the guy wants to smoke a joint after work in the evening or on weekends. It's his business, but he's going to test positive and he's not going to get the job.
Here's a couple of stories that concern the infamous border wall. This article is from marijuanamoment.net, and it says a coalition of Donald Trump's allies are looking into whether they could privately fund a wall along the Mexican border made of hemp. Now, Andrew, you did an article not too long ago about some of the more industrial uses of hemp now that the Farm Bill has made growing of it legal in certain respects. One of those products is what they call hempcrete, which is apparently extremely strong and lightweight and pretty inexpensive to make.
Yeah, it's mold resistant. It doesn't burn. There's, all kinds of. It takes a lot less CO2 to make hempcrete than it does regular concrete, and it actually gets stronger with age.
Now, this coalition, which also includes Kansas Secretary of State Chris Kobach and former Sheriff David Clark, is consulting with a Kansas-based hemp company about the possibility of erecting a hempcrete wall along the southern border. And the thinking, I presume, is that because the Democrats in Congress are unlikely to give an inch and include much more taxpayer funds, they've compromised a little, but I doubt they're going to go much further than that. That the group is going to pool their capital and get the job done themselves. I don't know how legal that would be, but it's something that they're talking about. But I think the interesting part about this is using the hempcrete. I would like to see a block of that stuff just to kind of hold it and see what it's like.
Yeah, it's stronger, it's lighter, so many advantages.
I saw that at a Cannabis Expo in Vegas, and it is lighter. And I told you the story before, but they went to the top of a 2-story building and dropped off a regular cinder block, which busted into 1,000 pieces. Then they dropped off the hempcrete block, and it bounced.
Right.
Wow.
Well, this would not be possible a year ago.
Right. The Farm Bill.
Before Trump signed the Farm Bill. But now, who knows? On the other side of the border, here, this is kind of a funny story. This is a story from herb.co, Herb magazine online. Mexican authorities, along with the CIA, confiscated a van, and you really should see this picture, with massive amounts of ammunition, that is marijuana as ammunition, and a bazooka used to fire many, many pounds of pot across the border. Talk about a way to get around the wall. They're not going around, they're going over the wall. Remember back in September when Trump said the wall separating U.S. and Mexico should be a see-through in case someone throws a humongous bag of drugs over it and bonks somebody on the head? Well, it looks like one Mexican cartel is going out of their way to lend that fear some credit.
That's pretty clever.
Credence. This was back in November. The Mexican Ministry of National Defense and the CIA working together confiscated a van containing more than 2,000 rounds of ammunition, 800 kilos of marijuana, and a homemade weed bazooka used to fire the stuff across the border.
Wow.
The smugglers had been shooting 45-kilogram parcels of drugs from the border town of Agua Prieta.
Well done.
Situated just next to Arizona. And they're not the only ones that are doing it. Apparently, all kinds of, Wile E. Coyote type gizmos have been used to launch drugs across the border.
They are a clever bunch.
From drones to trebuchets.
Yeah. You could program a drone
things
to go from one point to another at night with no light at 200 feet or 300 feet, and radar's not going to pick it up. No one's going to see it from the ground.
Now they'd have to make many sorties across, but to get
if they do 50,
but they're doing it.
You get 10 drones, and each of them do 5 runs. It's 50 runs, and they each carry a couple pounds.
Pretty soon you're talking a lot of drugs.
Yeah, you can get tons of it. And no one's going to. How can you see it?
Give me an idea.
So it just
here's my retirement plan.
it just goes to show that the more we ramp up the countermeasures to drug importing, the weirder the cartels start to get. So we'll see what becomes of the Mexican bazooka. Well, thanks again, everybody, for joining us today. And as always, we want to impress upon you that the time is now to get involved. Stay informed. Go to VoteProPot.com. Check out our Take Action page. You'll see a whole long list of resources and information available to you to find out what's going on with your state, with your legislators, what the topics are, what the issues are, and make your voice heard. The time is now to do it while these things are still being debated. And so definitely check us out at VoteProPot.com.
Or send us an email at VoteProPot@gmail.com.
And please like and follow us on Facebook, LinkedIn, and Twitter. Just do a search for Vote Pro Pot.
Wish I was up in Vancouver at the Cannabis Cafe, smoking good old Centromega at the beginning of the day. But here I am in New York City, hiding out in Central Park, getting kidnapped by the police today sometime before dark. But I wish I was up in Vancouver at the Cannabis Cafe, smoking good old Centromega at the beginning of the day. The judge looked down upon me, frowned. He said, "Kid, get on your way. Just don't start out your morning with espresso and a J." I said, "I wish I was up in Vancouver at the Cannabis Cafe, smoking good old Centromega at the beginning of the day." Hitched on out to Portland, caught a ride up to BC, took the bus over to the neighborhood to have a bowl with my coffee. Now I'm up in Vancouver at the Cannabis Cafe, smoking good old Centromega at the beginning of the day. Smoking good old Centromega at the beginning of the day.